So why isn't life peaceful? Well, I would like to suggest to you that the existential reason for this is because conflict occurs because of finitude. So we have the infinite and we have the finite. The finite is the ordinary world in which humans live and survive most of the time. This is what we call life, right? It's your friends, it's your work, it's your family, it's international affairs, it's governments, it's societies, it's business, it's law. This is the world of the finite. Then there's the infinite. The infinite is God. The infinite is what spirituality is about. And many people have never become conscious of the infinite, but let me assure you it exists and you can become conscious of it. So there's infinite consciousness. That's like the highest level of reality. Infinite consciousness creates divisions within itself and imagines boundaries. These boundaries or forms are what create the physical world, the thing we call the physical material world. If there's no division, if there's no difference, if there's no boundary, then there's no creation and there's no form. So division is form, and form is difference. We've talked about this in the past, so I won't recapitulate that here, but just think of form as difference. So what that means is that, like, a cat is different from a dog. Literally what a cat is the difference between it and everything else that it is not. Likewise for a dog. So it's a specific finite set of differences that creates a cat versus a dog. And then they fight with each other. So even though reality as a whole, we've talked about many times, is infinite and it's one whole thing, it's indivisible, at the same time, it also contains divisions within itself. It has parts. And those parts, even though they're always part of a unity, those parts are finite. And so then what happens is that these parts come into contact with each other. And because they're finite, the nature of the finite is that it conflicts with itself. Because fundamentally what we're talking about is we're talking about division. We're talking about divisions within oneness. Division then creates conflict. See, you have different parts of reality. These subparts, we might call them, of reality, they must struggle with each other for survival. And if they don't, then they cease to exist as that particular form. They become infinite. They merge back into infinity, right? So for an object to be born, it has to be born out of infinite, indiscriminate oneness into something specific and finite. And then it has to, if it wants to stick around for any significant amount of time, it has to defend itself and its boundary to be that thing. Otherwise, it deteriorates and collapses. This is true not only of living organisms like cells and animals and humans, but it's true even of static, inanimate physical objects like a chair or your computer. It all degrades. Your chair degrades, your computer degrades, it's going to collapse, it's going to lose its form, and eventually it's going to turn to dust, and that dust eventually will get absorbed into some black hole or into the sun or whatever, and literally merge into oneness. So this is the fate of all things, not just living things, but inanimate objects as well. And so what's important to realize is that there is a fundamental existential trade-off between finite things. Most fundamentally, for you to exist, something else has to not exist. Do you understand this? For example, for you to exist as that human that you are right now, you had to not be a kangaroo. You had to not be a coffee table. You had to not be a taco. You had to not be your mother. You had to not be your nemesis or your enemy. You had to not be black, or not be white, or not be Asian, or not be Russian, or not be American, or not be Japanese, or whatever. There's a lot of things you're not which define what you are. See, what you are is interconnected existentially with what you're not. That's what makes you the finite thing you think you are. This is true not just of humans, but of all objects. For a rock to exist as a rock, it must not be a plank of wood. It must not be a taco. It must not be a kangaroo or anything else. It has to be exactly what it is, that specific rock, the way that you see it. And what a rock really is, it's not an object per se. It's a division within an infinite field of consciousness. And so it's a set of imaginary boundaries within an infinite mind, which is the mind of God, which is your mind, of course. Your mind is the mind of God, imagining you to be a human, creating a human boundary that is what you call you. So the question then arises, which imaginary boundaries will survive? All boundaries are imaginary. If you stop imagining them, they all collapse back down into pure indiscriminate infinity. So which of these forms and boundaries will survive? And who gets to say? Which forms will overpower other forms? And so fundamentally, conflict is equal to incompatibility or a lack of harmony and coherence. Because if you have a bunch of parts and those parts move around without siphoning energy from other parts, then you might say you have harmony and coherence. The energy is kind of being passed along in a smooth way. But a lot of what we see in reality and in nature is where one part is leeching off of some other part. And in fact, this is sort of necessary. This is how all organisms survive. Every organism has to feast on some other organism.